During dinner, my son-in-law laughed. "What's it like to be a loser?" Everyone laughed except me. I just smiled and asked, "How does it feel to know that this loser will no longer be paying your bills?" The moment those words left my mouth, Craig's face turned pale and the family table turned into a battlefield. You won't believe what he did next. He slammed his wine glass down so hard it splashed across the tablecloth, staining the corner of Lindsay's white linen runner. "Excuse me," he said, eyes wide like he'd been personally offended by my audacity to speak. Lindsay gasped, her hand frozen around her fork. My granddaughter dropped her spoon into her mashed potatoes. My older daughter, Mara, didn't say a word, just stared at me like she was seeing someone new. "You don't get to pull that in front of everyone," Craig snapped. "That's disrespectful." Craig opened his mouth again, but Lindsay cut in. "Mom, he was just joking," she said quickly, like she was trying to vacuum up the mess with her voice. "Don't take it so personally." "Here's what's personal," I said, standing. "The fact that for years I've kept your home running while you played entrepreneur and treated my daughter like a built-in babysitter and maid. You've mocked me behind my back and now in front of my face. So I hope you enjoyed the roast. Craig, it's the last thing I'll ever serve you." I grabbed my coat. Craig stood too, like he thought he could stop me with that puffed-up chest and empty bank account. "Where are you going?" Lindsay asked, her voice brittle. "Home," I said. "My actual home. The one I pay for myself, and tomorrow your automatic deposits stop. Call your bank, or don't let them bounce." Craig barked a laugh. "You think you're going to scare me? We'll figure it out without you." "Then I'm doing you a favor," I said. "Grow up, Craig." Tried doing it without training wheels or my checkbook. I didn't wait for a reply. I walked out, left my own birthday dinner, left the pie I'd spent hours baking, left the gifts on the counter unopened. I didn't cry in the car. I thought I would. But no tears came. Just a numbness that crept through my chest, slow and sharp like cold water running under cracked skin. I drove the 10 minutes home in silence, gripping the wheel like it was the only thing tethering me to the earth. At every red light, his voice echoed in my mind. What's it like to be a loser, and then mine? What's it like to lose the only person keeping your lights on when I pulled into my driveway? I sat in the dark for a long time, keys still in the ignition, engine ticking down as the warmth faded. That night, something inside me shifted. Not snapped. Snapping is sudden. This was slower, more final. A quiet closing of a door I'd left open too long. They didn't just lose my money that night, they lost access. They lost comfort. They lost me. Driving home alone, I played his laughter in my mind over and over, that smug, hollow chuckle Craig let out right after calling me a loser, like I was the punchline to a joke that had been rehearsed before I even walked through their front door. When I got home, the lights felt too bright, the air too still. I poured myself a cup of tea out of habit, not because I wanted it. The mug sat untouched on the kitchen counter while I stared at the steam curling into nothing. I couldn't stop thinking about all the ways I'd tried to help them, not because I was asked, but because I loved them. Because I believed that's what family did, that helping was the way I stayed connected, that being needed was the same thing as being wanted. What a stupid, dangerous lie. They loved the money, not me. It started with one phone call. I remember exactly where I was, standing in my kitchen, halfway through peeling an apple when Lindsay called, sobbing. Craig had lost his job again. Some kind of personality conflict with a supervisor. She said, "I didn't ask questions. I just listened." She sounded scared, tired, said the rent was due in 5 days and they didn't have enough for groceries. I told her, "Come over." I handed her $200 in cash before she even finished the tea I poured. She tried to protest weakly, but I waved her off. "It's just for a few months," she said, eyes wide and hopeful. "Just until Craig gets back on his feet." I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that because helping made me feel useful, seen. It gave me purpose again in a house that had grown quiet since my husband died. The space between my daughters and me had widened without him there to fill the silence. So I wrote a check, then another. Then I started paying the gas bill, and soon enough I was covering more than groceries. Craig had always had ideas. Investments, he called them. But they were really just money pits with shiny names. E-commerce, ventures, crypto schemes, a mobile car detailing service that lasted 3 weeks and never made it out of their garage. Each time he failed, Lindsay looked more tired, and each time I stepped in again, I told myself it was love. But deep down, I think I was afraid. Afraid that if I didn't keep giving, I'd lose them all together. It wasn't just the money. It was the way they talked to me, like I was part of something. Lindsay would call to update me on their plans, sometimes about the baby they were thinking about trying for, sometimes about the fixer-upper Craig was dreaming of flipping. And I felt needed. That was the trap, because when someone you love makes you feel needed, you don't see the chains they're slipping onto your wrists. You just feel wanted. But then the visits became less about me and more about what I could provide. Do you have any extra gas cards turned into, can you cover this bill and we'll pay you back next month? Which, of course, never came. I remember the exact day I realized Craig wasn't even embarrassed about it anymore. He walked into my house one Sunday, grabbed a 6-pack from my fridge, and said, "You're a lifesaver." Lindsay said you'd spot us again, like I was a line item on their monthly budget. That night, I looked at my bank account, really looked, and it hit me. I'd spent over $15,000 on them that year alone. And not once had Craig even asked me how I was managing on my retirement. Not once had Lindsay asked if I needed help carrying groceries or getting to my appointments. They just assumed I was fine, that I'd always be fine, that their needs came first. And worst of all, I let them because I wanted to feel useful more than I wanted to feel respected. Until now. Until Craig called me a loser with my own roast still warm in his mouth. That man who had lived off my savings, my kindness, my blind hope, had the nerve to laugh in my face. And suddenly, all those years I thought were acts of love turned into one long betrayal I hadn't dared name. They weren't grateful. They were entitled. And I wasn't helping anymore. The next morning, I got up early, dressed like I had somewhere important to be. Slacks, my crisp blouse, the one with the blue piping my husband always said, made my eyes look sharper. I didn't eat breakfast. I wasn't hungry. I was angry and focused. I drove straight to the bank. The teller recognized me. "Hi, Mrs. Dawson. Want your usual withdrawals?" "No," I said, calm but firm. "I need to speak with someone in private about freezing access to a few linked accounts." She blinked but nodded and led me to one of those tiny offices with a fake plant and a smiley manager who offered me coffee I didn't want. I sat down and pulled out a folder I'd stayed up all night compiling. Every transfer, every recurring auto payment to Lindsay and Craig's mortgage, their car insurance, even their streaming services. The total made my stomach twist, but I didn't look away this time. "I want them all stopped," I said immediately. The manager flipped through the printouts. "You're listed as the secondary payer for several of these. We'll need to unlink those manually. Do you want to notify the recipients?" "No," I said sharp. "Now, I'll let them find out the hard way." She looked up from the papers. "Of course. Anything else?" "Yes," I said. "I'd like to open a new savings account just for me. No linked family members, no digital access from outside branches. I want it locked down." That was the moment. Not dramatic, not loud, but it was the first decision I made in years that was only for me. For the first time in decades, I wasn't pouring into someone else's life. I was reclaiming mine. When the accounts were frozen and the new one opened, I signed the paperwork with hands that finally stopped shaking. Not because I was sure of myself, but because I was tired of being sure of everyone else instead. "Would you like checks mailed to your home?" the manager asked. "No," I said. "I won't be writing any for a while." Walking out of that bank, I expected to feel sad. I thought guilt would claw its way up my chest like it always did, but it didn't. What I felt was something else, like the first breath after holding it underwater too long. I drove home in silence, no radio, just the sound of my own thoughts. And for once, they weren't asking if Lindsay was okay. They were asking if I was back home. I made myself lunch. For once, I used the good china, sat at the table instead of in front of the TV, and as I ate, I looked around my house, really looked at it. All those family pictures, all those smiling faces. I couldn't tell anymore which smiles were real and which were performances, but mine in that moment was real. They didn't know it yet, but I had taken the first step. Quiet, invisible to them, but monumental to me. I didn't need to storm out with suitcases or post dramatic updates to social media. I didn't need to scream or explain. I just needed to stop giving. And I had. Let Craig and Lindsay figure out what happens when the loser they laughed at decides to stop playing the game. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done at the bank. Not yet. But I needed to be around people. Real people. People who didn't know me as just Lindsay's mom or Craig's retirement plan. I remembered an old flyer I'd seen at the library a few weeks earlier, a genealogy club. Nothing fancy. Just a small group that met on Tuesdays in the back room near the computers. I didn't expect much. But that's the funny thing about starting over. You don't always know what you're walking into until you're already seated. There were about 10 of us that day, all older, mostly widowed, some with photo albums in tow. I didn't bring anything, just myself. That felt like enough for once. The man sitting beside me introduced himself as Thomas, retired machinist, sharp eyes, kind smile, hands that looked like they still remembered how to build things. He noticed I wasn't really following the software tutorial and leaned in to whisper a quiet joke about how confusing Ancestry.com had become. I laughed genuinely. I don't remember the last time that happened without forcing it. During the break, we got to talking. Nothing deep. Where we'd grown up. How many grandkids we had. I admitted I had 2. That I was reassessing things with my youngest daughter. He didn't pry, just listened. And then he said something I didn't expect. They can't rob you of your worth unless you hand it to them. It stopped me cold. He wasn't talking about theft. He meant something quieter, more dangerous. The way people chip away at you until you start doing the damage yourself. I nodded slowly. I think I've been handing mine over by the handful for years. He didn't try to fix it. Just patted my wrist, then stop. Take it back. You'll be surprised how fast some folks scatter when they can't leech off your softness. That stuck with me. It followed me home like an echo. A truth I hadn't put into words before. Craig didn't destroy me with one insult. Lindsay didn't undo our relationship overnight. It was drip by drip, joke by joke, silence by silence. And I'd let them. But not anymore. That night, I sat at my desk, opened a fresh notebook, and wrote down one sentence. They can't rob you of your worth unless you hand it to them. Then, I started another list. A new one. Not of what I gave them, but of what they took. The emotional kind, my time, my sleep, my dignity. That list was longer than I expected, and it lit a fire in me. This wasn't just about stopping payments anymore. It was about making sure they felt what it was like to stand on their own, to realize the foundation they'd built their little kingdom on wasn't love. It was me. And now that foundation had walked away. They'd mocked me in public. They'd used me in private. And when the ground finally shifts beneath them, when the bills bounce, when the bank won't honor their automatic payments, when their friends start asking questions about why Craig's card was declined at brunch, well, that's not just going to be justice. That's going to be earned. I hadn't been to church in weeks, maybe longer. Not since the night Craig called me a loser. And the floor beneath my life shifted. I didn't stop going out of spite. I stopped because I didn't recognize myself, and I figured God was already watching. I didn't want him to see me like that. But Sunday morning came, and I got dressed, put on a soft green sweater, not to be seen, but to remind myself I still had somewhere I belonged, after service. I stayed behind and waited outside Pastor Miriam's office. She'd known me since my husband passed. Sat beside me at the funeral, brought me soup when I got shingles that year after Lindsay's wedding. She was one of the few people who never treated me like I was fragile or in the way. She opened the door and hugged me without saying a word. "I need to talk," I said, "but I don't want a sermon." She smiled gently. "Then I'll just listen." I told her everything slowly. From the dinner table, humiliation to the years of slow financial bleeding. I confessed the anger, the shame, the bitterness I wasn't supposed to feel as a mother. Mothers forgive, mothers forget. I didn't want to forgive this time, and I didn't want to forget. When I finished, Pastor Miriam was quiet for a long moment, then she folded her hands and looked at me, not like a woman in crisis, but like someone waking up. "Why have you stayed quiet so long?" she asked. The question cut deeper than I expected. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe guilt. Maybe I was afraid that if I stopped helping, they'd stop loving me." Did they ever love you for who you are or for what you give? That was the question that dug straight through the last of my denial, because I didn't know the answer anymore. "You're not a bad mother," she said softly, "but you are a hurt woman, and those are not the same thing." I looked down at my hands, at the wedding band I still wore on my right hand, at the small scar on my palm from the time Craig asked me to assemble that ridiculous IKEA crib, and I sliced my skin on the packaging while he watched football. "I think I thought being quiet made me strong," I whispered. "No," she said. "Being quiet made you invisible." And there it was. I left her office with no dramatic clarity, no bright light from the heavens, just a deep, growing stillness, the kind of peace that doesn't come from forgiveness, but from being done, really done. I wasn't going to play martyr anymore. I wasn't going to let my daughter cry her manipulative little tears while Craig mocked me behind my back. I wasn't going to offer up my comfort and savings to be trampled on by people who wouldn't spit on me if I were on fire unless they could write it off on their taxes. They took my kindness for currency, but kindness doesn't owe them a single dime. What's coming next isn't just silence, it's strategy, it's clarity. It's the beginning of the end for them. And I'll still pray, but not for forgiveness, for justice. The next morning, I got up at 6:15 sharp. No snooze button, no second cup of coffee. I had work to do. My home office had been gathering dust for years, used mostly for Christmas cards and tracking prescriptions. But that day, it became something else, a war room. I pulled out every old receipt, every email confirmation, every bank statement I'd lazily filed away under Lindsay and Craig. I opened an Excel spreadsheet and started typing cell by cell, transaction by transaction. It started with the $850 mortgage transfer I sent them back in October. Then the groceries, Instacart, Whole Foods, even that overpriced butcher Craig insisted on. I dug deeper. Amazon orders for toys I never saw in the house, an electric patio heater, a weekend at a lakeside Airbnb for Craig's mental health. Lindsay had said that one stung. I'd spent that same weekend alone with a heating pad and a box of off-brand soup. When I finished, the total came out to $47,332.19, and that was just the last 3 years. I stared at the number for a long time. My mouth went dry, and then I printed the spreadsheet. Not for them, not yet. For me. To remind myself that I hadn't imagined any of it, that this wasn't just family helping family. It was theft in slow motion with permission, with a smile. But permission had just been revoked. I opened a new folder labeled Documents for Legal Review. I wasn't sure I'd need a lawyer yet, but I'd learned the hard way. These people didn't ask. They assumed. They didn't knock. They took. So I needed to be ready. I saved every message Lindsay had sent in the past 6 months, especially the ones asking for help, screenshotted them, filed them. I even found one from Craig. "Any chance you can spot us for rent again just until the crypto turns around?" I almost laughed. Turns around like his dignity was on back order. I kept working quietly, deliberately. I updated my passwords, called my utilities, and removed them as secondary contacts, removed Lindsay from my ATA roadside plan, changed the Netflix password. Petty, maybe. But it felt good. Like sewing up 100 small holes they'd poked in my peace of mind. By noon, I'd done more to protect myself than I had in the last decade. And here's the thing. They still had no idea. Craig was probably sitting on that patio I helped pay for, drinking a beer and chuckling to himself, thinking the old bat had finally gone quiet, and Lindsay probably texting some sob story to her sister, playing victim. She always was good at that. But they wouldn't be laughing much longer because the money was cut off. The documents were piling up, and I had one hell of a paper trail. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore. This was about documentation, about being ready when the truth finally hit their spoiled, ungrateful face. So when they came running, when Craig's credit card declined at the hardware store or Lindsay's Venmo bounced at Target, I wouldn't need to explain a thing. All I'd have to do was hand them a copy of the spreadsheet and walk away. No more second chances, no more soft landings. Let them feel what it's like to be dropped. I should have known. Peace wouldn't last. It had been 3 days since I shut off the auto payments. 3 whole days of silence. No texts from Lindsay. No fake cheerful calls from Craig. I almost let myself believe they got the message. But then I saw her. I was walking to my car with a loaf of rye bread and a bag of oranges, minding my business, when a shiny SUV swerved too quickly into the spot beside mine. I knew that vanity plate before I saw her face. Lindsay stepped out, sunglasses on, ponytail high, holding her phone like a shield. She wasn't smiling. She walked straight up to me like she owned the pavement between us, like I owed her this confrontation. "We need to talk," she snapped. I didn't flinch. About what? Her voice was sharp and tight, like she'd been holding it in since the moment the payment bounced. "You embarrassed Craig." "Did I?" I said calmly. "Loading my groceries?" He seemed comfortable embarrassing me. She rolled her eyes. He was joking. That's how he talks. He didn't mean anything by it. I shut the trunk harder than I needed to. Funny how no one in that room asked what I meant when I said I was done paying your bills. Her mouth twisted. She hated losing control. Always had. "You can't just pull the rug out from under us like this," she hissed. "That's cruel, that word, cruel." I stared at her. My daughter. The girl I used to rock to sleep after nightmares. The woman I had just spent nearly $50,000 supporting, and she was standing there in a $300 coat accusing me of cruelty. "You're driving a Lexus, Lindsay," I said. "And you're standing in front of your elderly mother who has been paying your rent, your food, and your utility bills for years. You don't get to talk to me about cruelty." She folded her arms, posture stiff. "It's not like we asked for all that. You offered—" "No," I said, voice low now. "You manipulated. You implied. You cried and sighed and let your husband send me guilt trap texts at 11 p.m. when you were late on rent again. And I was stupid enough to believe helping was the same thing as being loved." That stopped her for half a second. Then her eyes narrowed, and she said the one thing that turned my blood to ice. "Well, maybe if you'd just been a better mother when we were growing up, you wouldn't feel like you had to buy our love now." I stood there stunned. That was the cut, not just a jab. A wound meant to bleed. She said it like a woman trying to win an argument, not realizing she'd just lost me forever. I stepped closer. "You know what's cruel, Lindsay. Watching your mother cook for you while you mock her behind her back, letting your husband humiliate her at a dinner table she paid for, and then having the audacity to stand in a parking lot with your blowout in your latte and call her a failure." She blinked. I saw the first flicker of doubt, but I wasn't finished. "You're right," I said. "I did try to buy your love because deep down I knew it wasn't freely given, but that's over now." I got in the car and started the engine. "You're going to regret this," she said, voice cracking just enough to sound like fear. "No, sweetheart," I said through the open window. "You are." And then I drove off, leaving her standing there, still trying to figure out if she'd lost her bank account or her mother. Spoiler, it was both. 2 days after the parking lot ambush, I sat at the back of the community center during book club, quietly sipping weak coffee and pretending to care about the novel we were supposed to discuss. But I wasn't really listening to anyone, not at first. My mind kept drifting back to Lindsay's words. "You're going to regret this." No, I wasn't. I already regretted too much. Staying silent, handing over thousands, mistaking manipulation for love. But not this. This was the one decision I didn't carry like a bruise. It felt clean, cold, necessary. Still, I felt hollow, not broken, but emptied out. Like grief had vacuumed the last bits of illusion from my chest, and then Beverly started talking. 74, widowed, sharp as a tack. She was supposed to be reviewing the novel's ending, but instead closed her book with a sigh. "I swear fiction is nothing compared to real life. My son's been bleeding me dry for years." I blinked. She went on like she'd opened a floodgate, started small, borrowed money here and there. Then it became a monthly pattern. He got real quiet when I cut him off. Another woman, Carol, chimed in. "My daughter thinks I'm her personal retirement plan. She called me selfish because I wouldn't co-sign a loan for her third wedding." The room went still. Then slowly laughter. Bitter, knowing laughter. I didn't say much, just nodded. But when someone said, "It feels good just to say it out loud," I found myself answering quietly. I told my daughter I wasn't paying for anything else. I said, voice low. Her husband called me a loser, so I decided to stop being one. Every head turned. Then Carol leaned in. "Good for you." And I realized something that made my spine straighten. I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only mother who had been manipulated, used, left out of the family photos, but kept on the bank transfers. They called it love, but it was leverage. That hour in the book club didn't fix everything, but it gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Validation that I wasn't cruel, that I wasn't crazy, that maybe I wasn't the problem. Afterward, Beverly stopped me in the hallway. "Whatever you're going through," she said, "remember this? Once you stop letting people write checks against your self-worth, they'll either get mad or disappear. Both are blessings." That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, and when I woke up the next morning, something had settled inside me. Resolve. Not the panicked kind, the cold, deliberate kind, the kind you get when you finally see your enemy clearly and know you don't owe them kindness anymore. They wanted my silence. They wanted my guilt. They wanted my money. Instead, they were going to get my consequences. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't warn them. I just drove over to Lindsay's house on a rainy Tuesday afternoon with a manila envelope in the passenger seat and zero emotion left in my tank. It wasn't a visit. It was a delivery. I rang the doorbell twice. She opened the door half surprised, hair messy, like she'd just woken up from a nap she didn't deserve. "Mom," she said, voice cautious. I held up the envelope and handed it to her without a word. She looked down at it like it might explode. Inside was the spreadsheet, every cent I'd paid on their behalf since 2021. 47,332.19 broken down line by line, date by date, card by card, topped with a single cover letter that read, "This is everything. You will receive no more support from me. If you attempt to guilt, threaten, or harass me, this document will be forwarded to legal counsel. Do not contact me unless it's to apologize and mean it." She clutched it, but didn't open it. "What is this?" she asked. "Truth," I said. "And the invoice for your entitlement," she scoffed. "Are you serious?" "As serious as the overdraft you're probably about to discover." Craig appeared behind her in gym shorts, and that same idiotic smirk he always wore when he thought he was the smartest man in the room. "What's this, another guilt trip?" "No," I said, stepping back off the porch. "It's a statement. I gave you every chance, and you spat in my face. So now I'm done. You think this little spreadsheet changes anything?" Craig barked. "No," I replied. "Cutting you off did." He started to say something else, but I turned and walked back to my car. Just before I closed the door, I called over my shoulder, "Oh, and if either of you tries to play victim to Mara or the rest of the family, I have copies. Don't make me show them what I was really funding while you two played house. I drove away without looking back. I didn't need to see their faces. I could feel their panic from the driveway. That envelope weighed more than money. It was power. It was proof. I went home, made tea, and set the other copies in a drawer. One with my lawyer's name on it, one marked Mara, and one tucked away for myself, just in case I ever needed reminding that I was not crazy. I was used. Let them chew on that. Let Craig try and explain how his startup dreams were funded by the woman he mocked with wine on his breath. Let Lindsay cry and play the good daughter to friends who only know half the story. Let them both watch the walls close in as the last hand that held them up finally lets go. I used to think revenge had to be loud. Screaming matches, shattered plates, courtroom drama. But this was better because it was cold, calculated, and irreversible. They laughed at me. Now they'd choke on that laughter. Bill by unpaid bill. That night I didn't sleep. Not from fear, not from guilt, but because I was wide awake for the first time in years with nothing left to ignore. I lay in bed with the lights off, the street lamp throwing stripes across the ceiling like prison bars, and I let myself feel everything, not to wallow, not to forgive, just to see it all, the whole bitter picture. Craig laughing with red wine on his lips, Lindsay saying I was cruel for protecting myself, the dinners, the favors, the years I confused being needed with being loved, and then the stillness, not loneliness, just stillness. I didn't cry at first. I just breathed. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'd already thrown it hard, right into their entitled, grinning face. But then somewhere between 2 and 300 a.m., the tears came. Quiet ones, the kind that sting, because they're not begging anymore. They're burying something. I wasn't crying because I missed them. I was crying because I missed who I thought they were. I missed the idea of family. The illusion I'd clung to that maybe if I just gave a little more, loved a little harder, they'd eventually see me as more than a wallet in human skin. But they didn't. They loved the comfort. They loved the convenience. But me? I don't think they ever really saw me. Not since their father died. He was the glue, the referee, and the buffer. When he was gone, I stepped in with my checkbook instead of boundaries. I thought it was what he'd want, what a good mother should do. But what kind of mother lets herself be slowly erased just to stay in the room? Not anymore. That night, I made peace with something dark and necessary. Lindsay and Craig were never going to apologize. Not really. Not because they couldn't, but because in their minds they'd done nothing wrong. And people like that don't change when you ask them to. They change when you stop protecting them from consequences. So I rolled over, stared at the moonlight on the carpet, and whispered out loud, "You won't hurt me again." Not a prayer, not a threat, just a vow. A quiet, sacred promise that I would no longer make myself smaller so they could feel tall. I would no longer mistake their needs for my obligations. And if they thought what I'd done so far was the end, they hadn't seen anything yet. Because that spreadsheet was just the prologue, the real story, the one where they paid for every joke, every slight. Every unspoken insult was just getting started. And the next chapter would be written in ink, signed by a lawyer, and bound in legal terms they couldn't weasel out of. They thought they were dealing with a pushover. They forgot I was an accountant for 35 years. Now I was finally doing the math. And when the final total comes due, they won't just lose the money. They'll lose everything I ever gave them. I didn't wait a week. I didn't even wait 3 days. That Thursday, I walked into the legal aid office with every receipt, statement, and document I'd spent the last month organizing. The paralegal raised an eyebrow when she saw the thickness of the folder. "Are we dealing with probate?" she asked. "No," I said. "We're dealing with liberation." She led me into a small meeting room with gray chairs and a chip table. 10 minutes later, in walked Mr. Darwell, mid-60s, sharp suit, no nonsense. He'd been a local attorney for 35 years, handled my husband's will, knew my name without looking at the paperwork. "What can I do for you?" "Margaret?" he asked gently, folding his hands. I placed the folder on the table and said, "I want to remove my daughter and her husband from every legal document that connects them to my name or money. Effective immediately." He didn't flinch, just opened the folder and started reading. The more he read, the straighter he sat. By page 10, he stopped and looked up. "They took advantage of you." "I let them," I said quietly. "But that ends now. For the next hour. We went through everything. My will, my living trust, my property holdings, the small investment account I'd been saving for the next generation. Lindsay and Craig had been listed as secondary beneficiaries across the board. Just standard, I thought, just what mothers did. Not anymore. I'd like to leave the majority of it to my great-granddaughter. I said, Me's daughter. She's kind, gentle. She's never once asked me for money, and the rest, he asked. I want a portion donated to the local women's shelter, the one I used to volunteer at before Craig decided my free time was his emergency fund. He nodded. I can make that happen. He pushed the revised draft across the table for my signature, and with one pin stroke, it was done. Craig and Lindsay didn't just lose future money that day. They lost access. They lost entitlement. They lost the security they built out of my generosity like it was some permanent fixture, an ATM with a heart. But the ATM just broke. And now, when I die, and that day will come, they won't be remembered in my legacy. There'll be a footnote, a closed chapter, a cautionary tale whispered by relatives who do know how to treat people with dignity. I made one more request. If either of them tries to contest anything after I'm gone, I said, I want a clause that penalizes them. No soft landings, no loopholes. They show their greed. They lose everything. Dar woman? No, I said. Just a woman who finally got tired of being called a loser by people who never earned a damn thing in their lives. He slid the signed documents into a protective binder and said, I've seen a lot of these situations. Yours feels different. It is, I said, because I'm not just cutting them off. I'm teaching them what it feels like when the floor disappears. And it would, the moment they find out they've been erased, not just from the accounts, but from the future. They'll feel it. Deep, permanent, humbling. They thought I'd go to my grave, still funding their lifestyles. Now I'll go knowing they finally understand one thing. Love without respect is not love, and money without gratitude is theft. The phone call came just after midnight. I was brushing my teeth, ready to settle in with a book and some well-earned silence when the screen lit up with Lindsay's name. I stared at it. Part of me wanted to let it ring, to let her voice go to voicemail, along with every other lie she'd tried to sweeten with panic. But something in me said, Pick up, I answered, not with hello, but with a simple, What do you want? Her voice cracked. Mom, it's Craig. He's been in an accident. I said nothing. She took that as permission to keep going. He was driving back from Cleveland. There was a wreck. A semi ran a red light. He's in the hospital. Mercy, General. They don't know if there's internal bleeding. Still, I didn't respond. I listened to her breathe, rapid and jagged, the way I used to hear her as a child when she'd had a nightmare, but this time I felt no urge to soothe. Then came the line I was waiting for. We don't have the coverage. The deductible's insane. We need help. There it was. Not worry. Not grief, need. She didn't call because she was scared. She called because she thought I'd forgotten that I'd come running, that I'd still be soft. I said, I'll be there shortly, and hung up. But I didn't go to the bank. I didn't grab my checkbook. I just put on a coat and drove. When I got to the hospital, I found Lindsay in the waiting room, pacing like a nervous teenager. She ran to me, hugged me like we were still close. Still blood. Still something. I didn't hug her back. I'm here, I said. But not for your bills, she blinked. What I came to hold your hand, I said, not to open my wallet. She recoiled like I'd slapped her. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said, calm and cruel in the way only truth can be. And it's amazing how clear things become when someone's lying on a hospital bed. You suddenly remember who you used to be. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't move. "You said I was cruel." I continued, "Let's talk about cruelty. Cruelty is laughing at the woman who pays your mortgage. Cruelty is calling your mother a loser in front of her grandchildren. Cruelty is bleeding someone dry and acting like it's affection." She sat down heavily in one of the waiting room chairs, pale and shaking. I stood over her. "This isn't revenge. This is exposure. I haven't changed. Lindsay, I'm still your mother, but now I'm not your fool." Just then, a nurse came through the double doors. "Craig Walker. Immediate family only." "Please." Lindsay stood. I didn't move. She turned back to me, pleading, "Are you seriously not going to help? I did help," I said. "For 4 years. This is you learning how to live without that help. Welcome to adulthood." She walked through the doors alone, and I sat in the waiting room, silent, still, unmoved, because this wasn't just a turning point, it was proof that they didn't miss me. They missed my usefulness, but now they had nothing left to use. The next morning, I returned to the hospital, not out of obligation, but because I had unfinished business. Craig had been moved out of ICU and into a recovery room. I asked the nurse if he was awake. She nodded, though her face said he probably shouldn't be talking. Too bad. I stopped at the cafeteria first, got myself a tea, and sat near the window, calm, waiting. Lindsay eventually found me. "He wants to see you," she said, voice flat. I followed her to the room. Craig lay in bed, his face bruised, right arm in a sling. He looked smaller, deflated, but the arrogance still intact. As soon as Lindsay left the room, he turned to me and sneered. "So this is what you wanted to watch us suffer." I met his eyes. No, I wanted respect. "You couldn't give that, so now you'll get silence." He laughed and winced at the pain it caused. "You're enjoying this." "Not enjoying," I said, "but I'm no longer apologizing for it." He leaned forward slightly, wincing again. "You really cut us off even after this." I raised an eyebrow. "Especially after this." He scoffed. "Unbelievable. After everything we've done for you, inviting you over, including you in holidays, letting you be part of the kids' lives." My blood turned to ice, letting me. I stepped forward slowly, deliberately. "You stood in the home I helped you keep and laughed at me in front of your children," I said, voice low, controlled. "You drank the wine I bought, ate the food I paid for, and then had the gall to call me a loser." He didn't respond. I kept going, "And now you want to paint that as generosity. You didn't include me. You used me. And now, Craig, I'm not just cutting off the money. I'm cutting the cord." His eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I've seen my lawyer," I said. "It means you're out of my will. Gone. Lindsay, too." He stared at me like he didn't believe it. "Your daughter wouldn't do that," he muttered. "She didn't." I said, "I did." He blinked. I could see it finally settling in, that I wasn't bluffing, that the tap wasn't paused. It was sealed shut. I leaned over close enough for him to smell the peppermint on my breath. "You taught me what suffering really feels like, Craig. Not the kind that comes with broken bones, the kind that comes with betrayal, that comes with sitting in your car after a family dinner wondering if you'll ever be loved for anything other than your bank account." I straightened up. "Now you'll learn about survival without me." He didn't speak, just stared at the wall, like it might give him a better answer than I ever could. I left the room without saying goodbye, because goodbye is something you give people you respect, people you might see again. Craig, he got silence, he got absence, and soon he'd get the bills. It was raining again, fitting, not a storm, not dramatic, just steady, cold rain. the kind that soaks everything before you notice, the kind that washes away what doesn't belong. I arrived early. Mr. Darwell already had the conference room prepared. Documents lined the table, envelopes sealed, signatures waiting. I sat across from him, hands folded, heart steady. He nodded. "You sure about this?" I didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." 10 minutes later, Lindsay and Craig walked in. Craig had a brace around his ribs and that same bitter scowl he always wore when he wasn't in control. Lindsay wore sunglasses indoors like shame could be filtered through tinted lenses. They didn't sit. They just stared at me like I was supposed to explain, but I didn't. Mr. Darwell cleared his throat and handed them each an envelope. "These are formal notices of removal from Margaret's estate planning. All assets, trusts, and properties have been reassigned. You are no longer beneficiaries." Lindsay's lips parted, but no sound came. Craig was faster. "You're cutting us out." "Correct," I said. "You're going to die alone," he hissed. "I'd rather die alone than be surrounded by people who'd sell my dignity for a car payment." Lindsay finally spoke, voice shaking. "You can't do this. You're our mother." "No," I said. "I was your safety net. You cut the ropes. Now you fall." She clutched the envelope like it burned. "How could you be so heartless?" I stood and looked her straight in the eye. "You laughed at me. I didn't mean it. But you meant every withdrawal, every unspoken expectation, every time you looked the other way when Craig humiliated me." I turned to Craig. "And your mistake wasn't just calling me a loser, it was assuming I'd stay one." He laughed bitterly. "You think this makes you strong? No." I said, "I think this makes me free. Mr. Darwell handed them a final sheet, a clause that enforced legal penalties if either of them contested the changes. Craig's mouth twitched as he read it. "You planned this," he muttered. "For months," I said. "While you drank the wine I bought and sneered at the woman who paid your gas bill." Lindsay's voice dropped to a whisper. "You're still my mother." "No," I said. "I was your mother. Now I'm my own person." She started to cry. It didn't move me because these weren't tears of love. They were tears of loss, of income, of backup plans, of the cushioned life they'd built on top of my patience. "And now that life was gone, I gave you everything," I said quietly. "And you still laughed. So now you get nothing." Craig moved to speak again, but I raised a hand. "This conversation is over. This chapter is closed. If you ever show up at my door again, I will hand you your spreadsheet and call security." They stood there stunned as I gathered my purse and walked to the door. No more words. No dramatic exit. Just the click of my heels down the hallway, each step spelling it out. "You lost me. Thanks so much for watching. If this story hit close to home or made you think twice about what family really means, go ahead and hit that like button. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away from someone who kept taking more than they gave? Let me know where you're watching from and if you've ever faced something like this. You're not alone, and your story might help someone else feel a little braver today. And hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out the other videos. There's more where this came.